The early autumn sun cast a mellow glow over the village of Little Brackwell, the kind of sleepy English hamlet where roses nodded over white picket fences and gossip travelled faster than the morning post. To the casual visitor, Little Brackwell appeared entirely innocent, an assortment of tidy stone cottages, a modest high street with a greengrocer and a bakery, and, presiding gently over the landscape, Brackwell Manor. The manor had stood for centuries, weathering the tempests of time with the stubbornness of old English masonry. Miss Jane Marple had arrived 3 days prior, invited by an old friend she had known since the days of the vicarage jumble sales in St. Mary Mead. Lady Honoria Faversham, a woman of vigorous enthusiasm and limited foresight, had declared that Miss Marple must come at once to enjoy the peace of the countryside, the well-kept gardens, and the delightfully harmless social calendar of Little Brackwell. Miss Marple had accepted with her usual gentle grace, though she suspected Honoria's invitation was motivated by more than a desire for companionship. And indeed, upon her arrival, she found the household at Brackwell Manor humming with an undercurrent of tension that rather belied Honoria's rosy phrasing. The manor was home not only to Lady Honoria, but also to her nephew, Mr. Edwin Faversham, a scholarly man in his mid-40s with spectacles that forever threatened to slip from the bridge of his nose, Mrs. Clarissa Faversham, his elegant but nervous wife, Dr. Lionel Ashe, a frequent house visitor on account of Lady Honoria's supposed frailties, and Miss Penelope Penny Cartwright, Lady Honoria's young and spirited companion, who possessed a brisk walk and a sharper tongue than her employer seemed aware of. There was also Mrs. Brimley, the housekeeper, solid, dependable, and as difficult to startle as an old war-horse. Even in such peaceful lodgings, Miss Marple felt the faint rustle of something amiss. It was nothing she could quite place, merely the sense that voices grew hushed when certain names were spoken, or that Clarissa avoided Edwin's gaze with a little too much effort. Miss Marple had learned long ago that trouble in a household was like mildew, hidden until you knew where to look. The trouble, when it came fully into the open, did so on one crisp, clear morning that began, to all appearances, like any other, Lady Honoria, declaring herself strong enough for a little excitement, insisted on hosting a small tea-gathering in the manor's sunlit parlour. The table was set with her finest china-white porcelain, with tiny garlands of violets around the rim, and 3 kinds of cake. Miss Marple admired the simple elegance of the scene, noting to herself that few settings were so consistently revealing of character as a tea-table. People behaved differently when handed a delicate cup and confronted with polite company. The guests included only those already staying in the house, plus Miss Marple. Dr. Ashe arrived last, brushing a leaf from his coat sleeve as he entered. "Sorry, Honoria," held up by Mrs. Talbot's hens. "They appear convinced one of them is missing." A ripple of polite laughter passed around the room, save for Penny Cartwright, who rolled her eyes in a manner she thought concealed behind the teapot. Miss Marple noticed none the less. Conversation began cheerfully enough, though Miss Marple detected the subtle tension beneath the surface. Half-finished glances between Edwin and Clarissa, a trace of irritation in Penny's movements, and Honoria's determined obliviousness to all of it. The tea was poured, the cakes distributed, the conversation drifting into the usual topics, the unpredictability of the weather, the shortage of proper linen at the village shop, and poor Mrs. Gooding's rheumatism. Miss Marple watched quietly, her eyes drifting to the polished mahogany table. 3 cups stood slightly apart from the others, a small thing perhaps, 1 cup chipped faintly at the rim, another missing its saucer, the third bearing a faint stain on its handle. An interesting trio, Miss Marple thought, but said nothing. Honoria's voice rang brightly. "Do have more sponge cake, Miss Marple. Penny, dear, pass the plate." Penny leaned forward to oblige. then stopped. Her expression flickered, a frown creased her brow. "Lady Honoria," she said slowly, "I don't believe Edwin is—" But Edwin was not listening. In fact, Edwin was no longer participating in any conversation at all. He sat slumped slightly in his chair, his right hand resting unnaturally still beside his teacup. There was a moment, a soft, chilling pause, as the room registered the quiet wrongness. Then Clarissa gasped, "Edwin, Edwin, darling." Honoria's teacup rattled against its saucer. "Nonsense. He can't be." Dr. Ashe knelt swiftly beside Edwin, fingers to his throat, then to his wrist. His brow furrowed deeply. "Good heavens, he's gone." A silence fell heavier than any spoken word. Gone, dead, Edwin Faversham, breathing moments ago, now motionless, pale, lifeless in the sunny parlour of Brackwell Manor. Miss Marple lowered her eyes to the table again. 3 cups, and 1 corpse, and Miss Marple, who understood people far too well to believe in convenient tragedies, felt a certainty settle over her. Someone in this house had just committed murder. The immediate shock of Edwin Faversham's sudden death rippled through the parlour like a dropped stone in still water. Clarissa dissolved into trembling sobs. Lady Honoria sank back in her chair, pale and fluttering. Penny stood rigid, her hands clasped tightly before her, and Dr. Ashe, grave and efficient, issued instructions in a tone far steadier than his face suggested. Miss Marple, without remark, quietly folded a napkin over the half-eaten slice of cake Edwin had abandoned, then stepped back to observe the scene. Her eyes travelled unobtrusively from the 3 distinct teacups to the anxious faces around her. "Clarissa, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, "a little fresh air may help you." Clarissa nodded shakily. Penny guided her to the open French doors leading into the rose garden. Lady Honoria clutched at Miss Marple's hand. "Jane, what can have happened? He wasn't ill, not gravely so. Only a touch of indigestion last night." Miss Marple gave a small, solemn nod. "No, I didn't think he seemed unwell." She let her gaze wander as if lost in thought. "But sudden deaths during TR? Most unusual." Honoria's grip tightened. "Do you think, could it be his heart?" Dr. Ashe, overhearing, shook his head slowly. "I shall conduct a full examination, but no, Lady Honoria. Sudden, yes, but something is not right. His pupils, his colour. It doesn't sit well with natural causes." Miss Marple lowered her voice. "You suspect poisoning?" Ashe hesitated only a heartbeat. "Yes." Lady Honoria let out a tiny strangled cry, then fainted cleanly into Miss Marple's arms. Mrs. Brimley rushed forward. "Oh, not again. I'll fetch the smelling salts." In the confusion, Miss Marple managed one quiet, purposeful act. She examined the 3 unusual cups, the chipped one, the saucer, less one, the stained one, before anyone else thought to. All 3 were empty, all 3 had been used, and, she noted with disquieting certainty, the stained one was Edwin's. Later that afternoon, Inspector Dermot Coulson arrived from nearby Brackwell Green, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a tidy moustache and an expression of perpetual scepticism. He was accustomed to petty theft, the occasional poacher's quarrel, and the odd drunken scuffle at the local pub, but a poisoning at Brackwell Manor was a different matter altogether. He surveyed the parlour like a man afraid to tread on expensive rugs. "So," he said, notebook in hand, "we've a sudden death during tea. Local doctor suspects poison. Household of 6, 1 visitor. No sign of forced entry, no strangers about." His gaze flicked toward Miss Marple. "And you, madame, were present?" Miss Marple smiled politely. "Indeed, it was most unfortunate. Mr. Faversham seemed quite well at the start of tea." Coulson nodded. "Right. I'll need to speak to everyone, one at a time." Miss Marple, ever subtle, added, Do look carefully at the cups, Inspector, especially the 3 sets slightly apart. They were not part of the usual matching set. Coulson blinked, then eyed the table suspiciously. 3 cups, odd place for mismatched china. Quite, Miss Marple murmured. Interviews begin 1. Clarissa Faversham Clarissa sat on a chaise in the drawing-room, a lace handkerchief clutched tightly in her hands. She was still pale, but her tears had subsided into small, hiccuping breaths. We were happy. She insisted to Inspector Coulson. Edwin was difficult at times, yes, and absorbed in his research, but we had no real quarrel. Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively in the corner, caught the faint tremor in Clarissa's voice, betrayal, not grief, and her eyes never quite settled. They darted nervously toward the window, the door, anywhere but the inspector. When asked about the tea, Clarissa hesitated. I poured for myself and Lady Honoria. Edwin fetched his own cup. I didn't notice anything strange, but Miss Marple noticed something. Clarissa did not once ask what kind of poison might have been used. A curious omission for a grieving wife. 2. Penny Cartwright Penny strode in with her chin held high. She was young and sharp-tongued, but her eyes shone with a peculiar agitation. "Let's get this over with," she said bluntly. Coulson raised a brow. "You seem unusually calm for someone who's just witnessed a death." "I'm not calm," Penny snapped. "I'm furious. Edwin was, well, he was trouble, but he didn't deserve this." She gestured toward the parlour. "He was dabbling in things he shouldn't have, snooping around village affairs, asking questions." "What kind of questions?" Miss Marple asked mildly. Penny hesitated. "He said he'd discovered something unpleasant, something he meant to publish." A flicker of alarm crossed Coulson's face. "Publish? In a paper?" "No, a book." Penny swallowed. Edwin was writing a book on, well, family scandals, starting with his own. That, Miss Marple thought, was an excellent motive for someone. 3. Dr. Lionel Ashe. The doctor looked weary when he was called. He removed his glasses and polished them as he sat down. "I assure you, Inspector, I had no reason to harm Edwin. He was difficult, yes, and he questioned my medical advice constantly, but hardly worth murder. Mrs. Faversham said Edwin mentioned indigestion last night." Coulson said, "Did you prescribe anything? A mild herbal remedy?" Ashe frowned, but it couldn't have caused this. "No, someone added something to his tea." Miss Marple watched him closely. The doctor's hands were steady, but his eyes were calculating. He was a man who weighed consequences. Miss Marple's quiet observations, as evening shadows lengthened across the manor lawns. Miss Marple took a small, thoughtful walk through the garden. Her mind sifted through the day's impressions. 3 mismatched cups, 1 stained cup belonging to Edwin, a supper of indigestion the night before, a manuscript on family scandals, a wife frightened, not heartbroken, a young companion angry yet protective, a doctor too polished, too careful, and Lady Honoria, fluttery but oddly determined to insist everything was perfectly normal. Some households, Miss Marple murmured to herself, are like patchwork quilts, pretty on the surface, but full of loose threads underneath. She plucked a fading rose petal and let it fall, and she was becoming quite certain several people in this house had secrets worth killing for. The following morning dawned grey and unsettled, as though the weather itself sensed the unease lingering in Brackwell Manor. Miss Marple rose early, as was her custom, and found the household in a state of brittle quiet. Mrs. Brimley moved about the breakfast-room with stiff, silent efficiency. Penny avoided everyone's eyes. Clarissa had yet to leave her bedroom, and Lady Honoria, looking wan but determined, sat at the head of the table, stirring her porridge with aggressive resolve. Inspector Coulson arrived shortly after breakfast, looking less certain than he had the night before. "Good morning, madame." he said to Miss Marple, tipping his hat. "Thought I'd best continue the questioning before any more gossip spreads." "Oh, my dear Inspector," Miss Marple said warmly, "in a village, gossip spreads before the kettle boils. I dare say all of little Brackwell already knows Edwin has died, quite suddenly, in suspicious circumstances, and has already chosen the culprit besides." He groaned. "Heaven help me," Miss Marple smiled sympathetically. "It may help more than you know. Gossip, you see, has its uses." But Coulson did not share her confidence. "I'd like to speak with everyone again. There are inconsistencies creeping in." Inconsistencies, Miss Marple noted silently, were the bread and butter of a household hiding the truth. A disturbing discovery, Coulson's second round of interviews quickly uncovered the first twist. Dr. Ashe, summoned to Lady Honoria's sitting-room, arrived looking rather flustered. "Inspector," he said, glancing toward Miss Marple, who sat knitting in the corner, I thought you should know something. Edwin telephoned me last week, privately. He said he suspected someone in this house meant him harm. He claimed his research was close to revealing something scandalous." "Scandalous how?" Coulson asked. Ashe hesitated. He wouldn't say. Only that it involved a member of his family. Lady Honoria gave a faint gasp. "Good heavens! Scandal! In my family!" Miss Marple quietly noted that Honoria looked less shocked than her words suggested. Coulson scribbled furiously. "Why didn't you mention this earlier?" The doctor's jaw tightened. I wasn't sure if he was exaggerating. Edwin was prone to dramatics. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly. "Dramatics, yes, but paranoia. That isn't quite the same thing." Ashe stiffened. "Are you implying—" "Oh, no," Miss Marple said sweetly, merely observing. Yet the doctor left the room looking distinctly uncomfortable. The missing manuscript next came Penny, who strode in with her usual brisk energy. "Well," she demanded, "are you any closer to finding out what happened?" "That depends," Coulson said, "on whether you tell us the truth this time." Penny flushed. "I did tell the truth, really," Miss Marple asked gently. "You didn't mention the quarrel you had with Edwin in the library the night before he died." Penny's mouth fell open. "How?" "My dear, you forget. I was sitting in the drawing-room by the fire. The door between the rooms carries sound remarkably well." Penny deflated slightly. "All right, yes, we quarrelled. He said his book was going to change everything, that people wouldn't look at this household the same way again, and that I ought to be careful." "Careful?" Coulson echoed. He said some secrets were dangerous to keep." Miss Marple saw the tremor in Penny's fingers and knew the girl was genuinely frightened. "What secrets?" she asked softly. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me." Penny caught her breath. "But the manuscript, Inspector, it's gone." Coulson sat up sharply. "Gone? It's not in his desk, or the library, or anywhere." Penny swallowed. "And Edwin kept notes everywhere. Someone must have taken them. A stolen manuscript. A threatened family scandal. A writer dead at tea." It was becoming clearer that Edwin's death was not impulsive but planned. Clarissa's confession, or something like it, Clarissa Faversham, when interviewed a second time, seemed even more fragile. She twisted her handkerchief until it resembled a thin rope. "Inspector, Miss Marple, I haven't been honest," she whispered. Coulson leaned forward. "Go on. It's about Edwin's tea." Her voice quivered. I changed his cup." Miss Marple's knitting paused. "You changed his cup?" Coulson repeated sharply. "Yes," Clarissa said miserably. "His usual one had a chip, so I swapped it for one that wasn't part of the regular set. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it looked nicer." Coulson's eyes narrowed. "And which cup did you give him?" "The one with the stained handle." Miss Marple's face remained calm, but inside a quiet alarm chimed. That cup had been deliberately placed. Clarissa might have thought she chose it herself, but someone had ensured it would catch her attention. "You see," Clarissa said tearfully, "I made him drink from the wrong cup. If he was poisoned, it's my fault." "No," Miss Marple said firmly. "Not at all. That cup was positioned for you to choose. I am quite sure of it." Clarissa looked up, startled. "What do you mean, sometimes?" Miss Marple said. "The most effective murders are those in which the killer allows someone else to do the crucial act for them." Clarissa blanched. A curious incident in the pantry. Inspector Coulson was called away before he could press Clarissa further. Mrs. Brimley had found something in the pantry, a half-filled bottle of almond extract, almond, faintly reminiscent of cyanide. "Could be nothing," Coulson muttered, "or everything." But Miss Marple's blue eyes brightened. "And yet," she said softly, "no one has asked the most important question." Coulson groaned. "What question is that?" Miss Marple smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Why 3 cups were set apart, when only one was meant to kill?" Miss Marple had long believed that murder, like mildew behind wallpaper, was never a sudden occurrence. It grew quietly, feeding on silence, on hurt, on fear, until the day it finally showed itself. And as she walked slowly through the halls of Brackwell Manor that afternoon, she felt the strain of many years' worth of hidden grievances pressing behind its elegant facade. Inspector Coulson, meanwhile, was beginning to resemble a man juggling too many pieces of china and expecting at any moment for all of them to smash disastrously at his feet. 3 separate stories, 3 different emotional states, and 1 missing manuscript. He grumbled as Miss Marple joined him in the library. "This case is becoming a blasted circus." "Not at all," Miss Marple said kindly. "It is simply a household, complex, troubled, and rather unaccustomed to the truth. The pieces will settle into place soon enough, if we are patient." He eyed her knitting needles, today producing something that looked vaguely like a scarf, before exhaling. "I suppose you already have a theory." "Oh no," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Not a theory, merely an impression, and impressions can be quite dangerous things if not grounded in evidence." "Then let's find some." Coulson snapped open his notebook. "Let's start with these cups. 3 odd cups. Why 3, if only one needed poisoning?" Miss Marple placed her knitting in her lap. "That, Inspector, is the question we must answer before any other. For the moment we understand the cups, we understand the murderer." Coulson frowned, but Clarissa said she swapped Edwin's cup accidentally. "Nothing in murder is accidental," Miss Marple remarked, "even the things that appear so." The library was a grand chamber with shelves stretching from floor to ceiling, containing dusty volumes no one had touched in decades. A great oak desk dominated the centre, piled with Edwin's papers. Notes, observations, and half-formed chapters of his dull-laden manuscript. Coulson and Miss Marple sifted through them with care. "Look at this," Coulson muttered, holding up a crumpled sheet. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and read the heading, "Family Transgressions, a History of the Faversham Line." Her brows lifted slightly. Edwin had gone far beyond idle curiosity. This was intended as a full expose. "Not a wise hobby," Miss Marple murmured. "Families rarely appreciate being turned into literature." Under the heading were several bullet points. The first Faversham will, 1889, irregularities, disappearance of household staff member, 1912, unaccounted withdrawals from family accounts, 1947, medical consultation records, inconsistent dates, Dr. A. Lady H. S. Alteration of estate, documents, Clarissa. Correspondence hidden in sewing cabinet P. Cartwright, truth about parentage. Coulson blinked. Good grief, he was digging into everyone. Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Yes, and when one digs long enough, one eventually strikes something someone wishes kept buried." The inspector continued scanning the pages. still doesn't tell us what the scandal was. No, Miss Marple said, but it tells us who feared exposure. She pointed delicately at the list of names. Everyone in this house. Coulson swallowed. So they all had motive. Oh, unmistakably. A letter hidden in a book. Miss Marple, moving more lightly than her age suggested, wandered toward the shelves labelled fiction old bindings. She pulled down a faded copy of Jane Eyre, flipped it open, and a sealed envelope slipped out onto the carpet. Coulson nearly dove for it. What's that? Miss Marple examined the front. No name, but a smear of ink on the back, as though someone had sealed it hastily. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My dearest C, I cannot continue like this. If Edwin publishes what he's discovered, my position, our position, will be ruined. You must speak with him, convince him. If we cannot stop him, everything will fall apart. Yours always, L. Coulson stared. C. L. Who the devil? C is undoubtedly Clarissa. Miss Marple said gently, folding the letter, and L is Lionel Ashe. Coulson swore softly. An affair, yes, and a dangerous one, given Edwin's temperament. Miss Marple looked towards the doorway. If Edwin confronted them, or threatened exposure, one or both might have felt cornered. But Ashe's letter says convince him, not kill him. People do not always plan murder, Inspector. Sometimes they stumble into it through panic. Coulson rubbed his temples. We need to speak to Ashe. Now. Miss Marple placed a hand on his sleeve. Not just yet. Why not? Because guilt, Inspector, must be allowed to breathe. If you smother it too quickly, it hides. If you give it space, it reveals itself. A visit to Clarissa. The two found Clarissa in the morning room, staring blankly out the window while clutching a cup of tea she had not sipped. She looked up miserably. Have you found something? Coulson decided not to show the letter just yet. We're simply gathering information. Clarissa bowed her head. It's my fault. I keep thinking, if I hadn't changed the cup. Mrs. Faversham. Miss Marple said kindly, the cup was not chosen by you. It was chosen for you. Clarissa's fingers tightened around the porcelain. What do you mean? Tell me. Miss Marple said softly, the mismatched cups. Were they already set on the tray when you entered the parlour? Clarissa nodded. Yes, Mrs. Brimley had laid everything out. Who gave her the instructions? Miss Marple asked. I am not sure. She said Lady Honoria wanted the fine set used, but the fine set includes 12 matching cups. Those mismatched ones shouldn't have been there at all. Miss Marple nodded gravely. Which means someone placed them there deliberately, someone who wanted one cup to stand out, and who knew you, Clarissa, would try to be helpful and adjust things. Clarissa's eyes widened. Then I was manipulated. Beautifully so, Miss Marple said. Coulson cleared his throat. Mrs. Faversham, did Edwin know about your friendship with Dr. Ashe? Clarissa turned ashen. I know. No, he didn't. Miss Marple's kind gaze did not relent. My dear, husbands often know far more than they say. Edwin was writing a book about family secrets. Your correspondence was listed among his discoveries. Clarissa's breath hitched. Her teacup rattled. I never meant, for I didn't hurt him. I swear I didn't. Miss Marple patted her hand. I know, child, I know. But Coulson's doubt remained visible. When they left the room, the inspector exhaled. She's hiding something. Miss Marple shook her head. She is hiding many things, yes, but not murder. How can you be sure? Because her fear is the fear of exposure, not guilt. Honoria's puzzling behaviour. Lady Honoria Faversham was found in the rose garden, trimming blossoms with remarkable calmness for a woman whose nephew had been poisoned in her parlour. Inspector, Miss Marple, she greeted them without a tremor. More questions? Just a few, Coulson said. Lady Honoria, did you ask Mrs. Brimley to use the mismatched cups? Honoria paused mid, snip, mismatched? Good heavens, no. The violet set is always used when guests are present. Miss Marple observed her closely. Honoria's hands were steady, controlled, delicate, much like her manner of managing others. Lady Honoria, Miss Marple said gently, were you aware of Edwin's book? Honoria's shears froze. Book, yes, his research into family affairs. A shadow crossed Honoria's face. I'd heard rumours. He always fancied himself a writer, but such nonsense rarely comes to anything. Coulson interjected. He had found evidence of irregularities in the estate records. Records you oversee. Honoria's chin lifted a fraction. Are you accusing me of something? No, my lady, Miss Marple said mildly. We are merely observing that Edwin's research troubled many people. Honoria resumed trimming. My dear Miss Marple, every family has things best left in the past. Edwin never understood that. There was something chilling in her tone, not coldness but certainty. Tell me, Miss Marple asked softly, where were you last night around midnight? Me, Honoria blinked. Asleep, I assume. But Miss Marple noticed the faint smudge of ink at the cuff of Honoria's sleeve. Fresh ink, the same ink that had marked the back of the envelope in Edwin's hidden letter. A sudden shout before they could continue their questioning. A shout echoed through the manor. Inspector, it was Penny's voice. Come quickly. Coulson and Miss Marple hurried inside to find Penny standing at the top of the main staircase, white as linen. It's Edwin's room, she choked. Someone's ransacked it. They rushed upstairs. Books lay strewn everywhere, drawers yanked open, papers torn, a lamp smashed, but Miss Marple walked directly to the writing desk, where a single item had been placed neatly in the centre, a teacup. The chipped one, and on a scrap of torn paper beneath it, 2 words had been scrawled. Inspector Coulson surveyed Edwin's ransacked bedroom with a grimace, his jaw tightening as he took in the debris. This is no ordinary search, he muttered darkly. This was done in a hurry. It was done in anger. Miss Marple observed softly. She stood by the window, looking not at the chaos inside the room, but at the gardens below. Anger rarely leaves room for care. Coulson moved to stand beside her. Do you think the note is genuine? Miss Marple glanced at the chipped teacup sitting on the desk like a grisly ornament. That depends, she said slowly, on whom it was meant to frighten. Meaning what? Meaning, Inspector, that a message only has value if its intended recipient can read it. Coulson frowned. You think the note wasn't meant for Penny, or you, or me? Oh no, Miss Marple said gently. The note was meant for someone in this household, someone who would recognize that cup and what it symbolizes. Coulson stared at the chipped china. Symbolizes? It's just a cup. In Little Brackwell, Miss Marple murmured, nothing is just anything. A tale of 3 cups. The inspector rubbed his forehead. All right, Miss Marple. Suppose the murderer used the chipped cup for Edwin. Why put it here? They did not. Miss Marple corrected him. Edwin drank from the stained cup. The chipped cup was merely present. Coulson groaned. There are too many cups. There are too many lies. Miss Marple said calmly, the cups simply reflect them. He sank into a nearby chair, defeated. Explain. Miss Marple settled herself primly at the edge of the desk. Let us begin with the facts. The 3 cups apart from the main set were the chipped cup, the cup without a saucer, and the stained, handled cup. Yes, Coulson said impatiently. And each cup, Miss Marple continued, was associated with a particular member of the household. Coulson blinked. What? The chipped cup, Miss Marple explained, is the one Clarissa said Edwin always used, the one she avoided giving him because of the chip. Coulson nodded slowly. Right, the saucer, less cup, Miss Marple said delicately, is associated with Lady Honoria. Mrs. Brimley told me at breakfast that her ladyship hates saucers, says they clatter, and often has tea in the morning-room with a cup alone. Coulson blinked harder. And the stained one? Miss Marple gave a wan smile. Used by Penny earlier that morning in the garden. I noticed her wiping her fingers on the handle after picking blackberries. So, Coulson said, eyes widening, The murderer deliberately set out cups associated with 3 different people. Yes, said Miss Marple, but only 1 cup was poisoned. Why? Because, Miss Marple said quietly, the killer needed confusion. If the obvious cup, the chipped one, had been the only oddity, it would have been too easy for us to see the truth. Inspector Coulson stared at her. Someone wanted us to think the wrong person was the target. Exactly. Who was the poison really intended for? Coulson pressed a hand to his mouth. If the chipped cup is Edwin's usual cup, the killer knew Clarissa would change it. Clarissa is tidy and thoughtful. Miss Marple agreed. She cannot resist fixing small imperfections. The chipped cup was placed deliberately to prompt her to act, meaning Edwin wasn't the intended victim. Miss Marple folded her hands. Correct. Someone else was meant to die at that tea table. Coulson stared into space, trying to reorder the facts, but Miss Marple was already several steps ahead. The stained cup, she continued, is Penny's, but Penny did not pour her own tea. Clarissa poured for everyone except Edwin. So Penny was never in danger. No, the saucer, less cup, associated with Lady Honoria, was meant for her. Inspector Coulson froze. You mean the killer intended to murder Lady Honoria, not Edwin? Miss Marple nodded. The poison was placed in the saucer-less cup, but because Clarissa changed Edwin's, Edwin ended up drinking from the poisoned one. Coulson felt his stomach turn, so Edwin died because Clarissa changed the cups. Quite, he swore under his breath. So the murderer intended to kill Honoria. Yes, Miss Marple said softly. The true target was Lady Honoria, and Edwin's death was an accident. Coulson stared out the window. But why would someone want Lady Honoria dead? Miss Marple sighed quietly. Because she is the keeper of the family secrets, and Edwin's book threatened to reveal them. Re-examining the suspects now, the case looked entirely different. The murderer was someone whose greatest fear was Honoria discovering their secret, not Edwin publishing it. Coulson began pacing. All right, let's look at them. Clarissa had motive, her affair with Dr. Ashe, but she feared Edwin finding out. Not Honoria, and she's not cunning enough for this scheme. Penny felt protective of Honoria, no motive to kill her. Angry at Edwin, yes, but never at Honoria. Dr. Lionel Ashe, the affair with Clarissa, but Edwin, not Honoria. Was the threat also too medically skilled to use crude household poison? Lady Honoria herself, utterly illogical, that she would poison a cup for her own tea. So who does that leave? Coulson said, motive. Miss Marple reminded him softly, is often found where one least wishes to look. Coulson blinked. Mrs. Brimley. Miss Marple shook her head. Too loyal. Coulson stared. Then who? Miss Marple lifted a parchment from Edwin's desk, another page of his manuscript, headed The Inheritance of 1929, an error never corrected, and below a single note in Edwin's handwriting. Honoria knows the truth, but L knows I have proof. Coulson repeated slowly, L knows I have proof. His eyes widened. L. Lionel Ashe. Miss Marple looked at him steadily. No, Inspector. Lionel Ashe fears Edwin. He does not fear Honoria. L is not the only L in this house. Coulson froze. Lady Honoria. Miss Marple shook her head again, very slowly. There is another L, Inspector. She reached into Edwin's bedside drawer and withdrew a photograph. A young woman, smart eyes, firm posture, holding a child. Penny unmistakably. The name on the photo read, Lydia Cartwright. Coulson inhaled sharply. Penny's mother. Miss Marple nodded. Her mother, she said softly, and the late housemaid of Brackwell Manor. Coulson stared. Lydia Cartwright worked here. Yes, said Miss Marple. Until her sudden disappearance in 1912, Coulson paled. Edwin wrote about that disappearance, and he discovered, Miss Marple whispered, the truth. Lydia Cartwright did not leave. She died here. Her death was covered up to protect someone. Coulson swallowed. Honoria? No. Miss Marple said, "Someone younger, someone impulsive, someone frightened." Coulson stared at her in disbelief. "Penny," he breathed. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but unwavering. "No, Inspector. Penny was only a child." She touched the photo again. "But the one who caused her mother's death is still alive, then who?" Coulson asked, voice hoarse. Miss Marple looked up at him, blue eyes clear as glass. "Lady Honoria's son." Coulson blinked. "Honoria's son, but she has no children, no living children," Miss Marple corrected. "But she once had a son who was sent away, but who returned recently." Coulson shook his head. "Returned? Who? No one here." Miss Marple spoke softly, decisively. "Inspector, Lionel Ashe is Lady Honoria's illegitimate son." Coulson felt the floor tilt under him. "And Edwin discovered it. That is why Ashe needed Honoria dead, because Edwin had proof, and Honoria was the only one who could expose the truth." Coulson swallowed. "So the poison was for her," Miss Marple finished. "And Edwin died by mistake." A grey hush settled over Brackwell Manor as Inspector Coulson, flanked by 2 constables, led Dr. Lionel Ashe into the drawing-room. He looked pale, composed, almost resigned, yet there was a feverish flicker in his eyes that betrayed the truth Miss Marple had pieced together. Lady Honoria, wrapped in a wool shawl and trembling slightly, sat rigidly in her armchair. Penny hovered protectively near her, while Clarissa lingered behind, wringing her hands. Miss Marple, quiet but unmistakably authoritative, stepped forward. "Dr. Ashe," she began gently, "I believe we must now make clear what happened at tea, and what led to poor Edwin's untimely death." Lionel gave a brittle smile. "You've spun quite a tale, but tales are not proof." Inspector Coulson crossed his arms. "This isn't a tale. It's the truth you've been running from since the moment Edwin started writing his book." Miss Marple spoke calmly, almost kindly. "Edwin realized your mother, Lady Honoria, once bore a child before her marriage, a child secretly sent away, a child who returned as a young man of promise and took up the respectable life of a village doctor." Clarissa gasped. Penny stared. Lionel's jaw tightened. "And if it were true, what of it?" Miss Marple continued. "Lydia Cartwright was the only maid at Brackwell who knew. She helped Lady Honoria during the confinement. She saw everything, and when her ladyship's husband discovered the truth, he insisted the scandal be buried." Honoria let out a soft sob and covered her mouth. Miss Marple's voice softened, but Lydia threatened to reveal the secret. She quarrelled with the late Sir Brackwell. In a moment of panic, she was pushed, a fall down the stone cellar steps, officially recorded as a tragic household accident. Penny clutched her chest. My mother died here." Lady Honoria burst into tears. "Child, I wanted to tell you. I wanted to care for you, but my husband forbade it. I tried to send money, help, anything your family would accept." Lionel closed his eyes as though in pain. Miss Marple turned to him. "You learned the truth years later, after medical school, when returning to Little Brackwell. You despised Sir Brackwell for what he'd done, but after he died, only Lady Honoria remained, the one person who could, unintentionally, expose your parentage." Lionel's voice cracked. "I didn't want her dead. I only wanted the truth to stay buried, which made Edwin your problem." Miss Marple continued softly. "He was digging into Lydia's disappearance, and through local records and conversations, he'd realized a child was involved, an illegitimate child whose identity was the key to the scandal." Inspector Coulson added, "And Edwin wrote in his manuscript that Honoria knew the truth, but that Elle feared he had proof." Lionel's shoulders tightened. "He was going to publish, ruin her, ruin me. So you planned a murder?" Miss Marple said, almost sorrowfully. "You stage a casual tea on a warm summer day. Quiet, intimate, easy to manipulate. The poisoned cup placed as the one your mother would take. But Clarissa's tidying changed everything." Clarissa choked. "I only wanted Edwin to have a nicer cup. That," Miss Marple said gently, "saved Lady Honoria's life, but cost Edwin his." Lionel's mask cracked. Emotion, anger, grief, panic flashed across his face. I didn't mean for Edwin to die. I didn't mean for any of it. I only wanted to protect my mother. Once he published that book, it would have dragged her name through the mud. She'd have been destroyed." Miss Marple shook her head. "But murder destroys far more than reputation." A long silence settled. Lionel looked suddenly older, tired, hollow, spent. If she hadn't insisted on those blasted saucers, if Clarissa hadn't swapped "don't," Lady Honoria said sharply, lifting her head, "Don't you dare blame anyone else. I should have told you the truth long ago." Lionel stared at her, jaw trembling. "I only ever wanted to belong." Miss Marple's voice was quiet. "Belonging cannot be secured by fear." Inspector Coulson stepped forward. "Dr. Lionel Ashe, you are under arrest for the murder of Edwin Datchworth, and for the attempted murder of Lady Honoria Brackwell." Lionel didn't resist as the cuffs were placed on his wrists. He only whispered, "I never meant for it to happen twice." Penny turned away, hiding tears. Clarissa sobbed freely. Lady Honoria bowed her head in grief. Grief not only for Edwin, but for the son she had lost twice over, once to shame, once to his own desperation. As Lionel was led from the room, Miss Marple quietly collected the 3 cups from the tea-tray, handling each with a delicacy one might afford a holy relic. She placed them back into their cabinet, aligning them neatly, restoring order in the smallest, most domestic way. Penny approached her, voice trembling. "Miss Marple, do you think anyone will ever forgive him?" Miss Marple touched her hand gently. "Forgiveness, my dear, comes in its own time, but truth—" she glanced around the once grand drawing-room. "Truth must come first." Clarissa nodded weakly. "Will the village ever be the same?" Miss Marple gave a faint smile. "Villages rarely change, my dear, only people do." And with that, peace, fragile, tentative, but real, began to settle over Brackwell Manor once more. For in the wake of betrayal, heartbreak, and unintended tragedy, Miss Marple had done what she always did. She restored clarity where chaos had reigned, and returned a quiet English village to its gentle rhythm once again.